Hello and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rosanna Da Silva. I'm the Water Quality Manager for the New York, New Jersey Harbor and Estuary Program housed at the Hudson River Foundation. I also have the pleasure of wearing the hats of Green Infrastructure Co-Chair for Jersey Waterworks, as well as a steering committee member. I am pleased to introduce Commissioner Shawn LaTourette, who has been appointed by Governor Phil Murphy as of June 14th, 2001, as New Jersey's Commissioner of Environmental Protection. A lawyer and policymaker with more than 20 years of experience in environmental protection, Commissioner LaTourette began his career defending victims of toxic exposure, including organizing and advocating for the needs of the vulnerable New Jersey communities whose drinking water was contaminated by petrochemicals. As Commissioner of Environmental Protection, he is responsible for formulating statewide environmental policy while directing programs that protect public health and ensure the quality of New Jersey's air, land, water, and natural and historic resources. Commissioner LaTourette?
Well, thank you for that very kind, overly kind introduction, and for the invitation to join you all today. I'm excited to be here, and I look forward to when we can gather at the next conference in person. A couple of points that I wanted to share about DEP's work. So many of the attendees at today's conference engage with the Department of Environmental Protection in lots of different ways. So I thought I'd try to share some points that I think are broadly applicable to folks from local governments and from the building trades and from our trade associations, from advocacy organizations, and the like, with respect to some of the challenges and the opportunities that we have to improve upon our environmental infrastructure and our water infrastructure in particular. And so, and say if it's with whether we're talking about emerging contaminants like PFAS, for example, or the cyanotoxins that are that can be present in harmful algal blooms that are affecting New Jersey's lakes and some of our water supplies, whether it's dealing with legacy contaminants like lead or managing the risks and continued challenges of our combined sewer overflows in the communities that have those types of systems, or if it's just keeping our aging water infrastructure, our wastewater systems, our drinking water systems up to the high standards that New Jerseyans expect. There's a lot to handle, and I have to say, I am continually impressed by the great work of the people at DEP. And having been around this agency in some form or another externally for 20 plus years, and I thought I really knew DEP coming in, and I've been here for 3 years prior to serving as commissioner. I was deputy commissioner and the chief of staff and chief counsel. And I thought coming in that I really knew DEP, but there is no knowing this place without knowing its people. And when you come to know them, you come to love them. Honestly. And one of the hardest working programs in this department, and everyone works so hard, is our water resources management program, headed by and just incredible assistant commissioner in Pat Gardner, who I'm sure many of you know, and our directors in that program, whether it's Janice Brogel or Bruce Friedman, whether it's Trish Angelito, our state geologist, Jeff Huffman. It is an incredible team. And I sleep an inch above the bed and waiting to see what potential environmental issue confronts us. And it would be 6 inches above the bed were it not for this incredible team, right? They carry the challenges that we all face so that the New Jersey public doesn't need to, right? So that the public can have confidence in our ability to deliver clean water, in our ability, clean drinking water, and our ability to ensure that what we are discharging into our streams, into our rivers, into our tributaries, however small, into our bays and our lakes, that we're doing this work in a way that is compatible and will facilitate the long-term environmental and economic success of this state, and ensuring the protection of the health of our people. And it's no small order. And there's a couple of things, though, that I think folks should be aware of, especially as we look to deploy what will be an incredible degree, historic really, of new federal resources because of the bipartisan infrastructure law that is in the process of being implemented. And we received communication from EPA last week. I'm sure folks saw, and I hope you're all as excited as we are at DEP. And probably curious too about how we're going to spend all that money. No question, we can spend it. I think we have close to a $30 billion need for water infrastructure in this state, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the commitment of our governor and our legislature that has made continual investments in our state revolving fund so as to be eligible for more of the federal funds. And I'm thankful for the federal government's wisdom in deploying these resources, some of which without a requirement for state match, but that continued investment is critical. Because again, while we may have nearly $170 million to spend next federal fiscal year, we still have tens of billions of dollars in need. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to do that? How are we going to manage that deployment in a way that reaches the communities most in need, that tackles our most compelling public health and environmental problems? I won't pretend to have all the answers for you right now. I just got a letter last week. So, but there's a few key things that I want to make sure that we're doing. The first is that we are not just conscious of, that we don't just pay lip service to, but that we act upon the reality we face with respect to climate change, and that we don't waste these precious new federal resources in the development of projects that may not stand the test of time. And the sad reality is that we're not necessarily well tooled to do that, in part because of the way that our programs are structured. But we're going to get there. And by that, I mean some of the data that we base decisions on. Let's take the example of stormwater, right? Let's take the example of stormwater, talk about CSOs and the networks of facilities that help to manage that influx, right? Those who have heard me talk before may be familiar with my reference to the fact that New Jersey is ground zero for some of the worst impacts of climate change. I don't say that lightly. I say that because it is true. It is true, and we are operating in a system that does not account for not even the present day reality of what our stormwater management needs are, and certainly not the future needs. And that's where we need to go, right? Because when an event like the remnants of Tropical Storm Ida impact and, quite honestly, devastate our communities, the public expects that their government has acted in advance to avoid those things. And they're right to expect that, except we're not. Why? Because we're not looking at the existing increases in precipitation that help to facilitate those events that lead to increases in flooding, right? The models that we look at, the last data point ends in 1999, maybe in the early 2000s. And so we know, based on studies that we've commissioned with folks at Cornell and at Rutgers, that we've in the last 20 years seen an increase in precipitation between 2.5% to 10%, depending on where you are in the state, right? And then we look forward, right? Because we should deploy these funds in a way that they're apt to manage what is to come. And by the end of the century, we could see as much as a 20 to 50% increase, again, depending on where you are in the state, in that precipitation. And we have this once in a generation opportunity to right-size our infrastructure, to be ready for that. It would be a tragic mistake if we weren't. So that is one of the key priorities that I want to bring to the deployment of these resources. Let's make sure we spend them well. Let's make sure we spend them in a way that we are ensuring the long-term resilience of our communities, And I don't believe we have to punish ourselves or our economy or our communities in the quest to respond to climate change. Just the opposite, right? We have all the opportunity before us to deploy new funds in a really wise and informed way. And so that means changing some of our regulatory scheme to help facilitate that. It means informing the public to ensure that the public has the information to demand that their leaders, local, county, state elected leaders, are wisely deploying resources, right? Because I don't think the public is shocked that we see more increases in precipitation. They know that that's occurring. They're expecting us to act, and as long as I have the privilege of serving in this role, we will. And so we'll do that in the course of how we deploy regulatory reform, and we'll do that in the course of how we deploy grant and loan opportunities so that we can ensure that we are supporting our communities, that we are reaching those that are impacted by flooding. And that's in part on the stormwater side, and doesn't yet get me into wastewater and the upgrades that are needed there, so that we can get as many of our waterways off of the impaired list as possible. Right? We have an incredible team in the Bureau of Water Monitoring and Standards that is deploying the testing capacity, that is working with our educational institutions to make sure that we are monitoring our networks in order to help be informed and by the facts as they exist, and so that we can design policies that will help to remedy those conditions. I won't let their work go to waste. Right? That's why we need to look to establish new surface water quality standards, and why we need to work with wastewater folks in the wastewater industry to make sure that we are that we're not doing worse, that we're not contributing to the ongoing cycle of the proliferation of the PFAS problem. For example, right? We have the opportunity to remedy some of that. It's going to take time. It's going to take resources. It's going to take commitment. And when I think about drinking water, I know there is so much focus on lead, while there should be, right? There's no safe level of lead, and we have the ability to better protect the public health of our communities and most certainly of our kids. And we're working to do that. Even before Governor Murphy signed, and the legislature passed and the governor signed the legislation over the course of this summer that promotes the replacement of lead service lines in the state. Even before that, we were working to develop the New Jersey specific lead and copper rule, which is going to turn the paradigm of how we do lead and copper on its head. Because right now, and this is the case in so much of environmental protection, environmental regulation, very reactive, right? Why? Why do we wait for the problem? Why do we wait for the problem when we know it exists? And I believe that the very nature of environmental law and regulation is changing, that it is becoming more adaptive, more proactive. And that is no more the case than in the space, in the drinking water space with respect to lead, with respect to forever chemicals and other new emerging contaminants. So under Pat Gardner's leadership and leadership of Trish Angelito and Linda Ofori and their incredible team, we are in the process of getting ready to finalize a rule for proposal that will require us to assess and respond first. Let's not wait for an exceedance. Let's not wait for an action level. We know the lead is there. We have a moral obligation to correct for it. And in so doing, we will better protect public health as we replace the infrastructure. It's going to take time to get every lead line out of the state, right? And there are choices to be made, right? There are public health choices to be made, because if we can control for lead exposure, we can wisely deploy our resources to continue our progress on replacing lead lines, making sure that the new federal resources go into that. But let it not be the only thing we do, because there is so much more need. In fact, the need is so overwhelming that we must put ourselves in the position to be able to respond to the crises that have yet to materialize. And I think that if we are being proactive in the space of lead, if we are assessing upfront, if we are requiring measures of if we are taking wise steps on water quality parameters, if we're taking wise steps on corrosion control, and if we're requiring this more proactive upfront step, we will be able to keep pace with the protection of public health and the replacement of that infrastructure, and not have to make choices that we never want to make about where the money goes to help who is most in need, because we will have protected everyone. That's what the public expects. And I think we can deliver upon that. And I think it's an exciting time to be doing this work. I could talk about water and infrastructure and the jobs that it creates, the way that we have this opportunity to create a green economy. I could talk about how we are working within our structure here at DEP to have a more proactive approach to compliance and enforcement when it comes to drinking water and wastewater systems, and the reorganizations that we're undertaking to enshrine that policy within the very fabric of the agency. Talk about environmental justice and how communities have for too long been left out and left behind, whether they are poor white communities along the Delaware Bayshore or our urban core that is overwhelmingly Black and brown. And talk about how we have this chance to lift one another as we all rise. But since I don't have enough time to do all that, I'm going to say thank you for having me and turn it back over to see if there's any question or two that we could address together. It was an honor.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I have several questions I'm going to try to kind of lump together. And I think, a lot of the points that you just made, right, with the federal government prioritizing spending on water infrastructure and, even the state's efforts between that of like the NJDEP and the lead service lines, as you mentioned. One question that I'll pose to you, and I think that might be what we have time for, is, how will the department work to make those funds accessible to small and low-income communities to address those key infrastructure needs, such as lead service lines, combined sewer overflows, emerging contaminants like PFAS, and of course, the stormwater conveyance and how we deal with, the intense precipitation rates that we get, such as Hurricane Ida that we had just experienced.
So there's no single answer to that sort of combining of questions. But if there is, I think it's this. There's only one way that we do that, and it's together, right? So we've got to have the folks around the table who are helping our agency to prepare the planning that is necessary to deploy these funds. Right, so we're going to use the intended use plan model in order to deploy funds. We need to hear from communities that, with respect to what their priorities are, the infusion of additional federal funds makes this a different type of planning process, I believe, and it allows us to be more expansive. But if we don't hear directly, right, if we're not doing the outreach and engaging at all the different levels that we can, we're not going to have a plan that reaches everyone it needs to. So part of it is outreach, part of it is collaboration, and part of it is using the knowledge and the experience of the folks at DEP who know where the problems are. Right? Where do we have issues with communities that are underserved, that have had creditworthiness issues, where they may not have the same ability to access the package of financial incentives as between DEP, Water Bank, iBank combination that will provide that opportunity of investment? We've got an opportunity to do that with these federal funds because we have we're going to see greater degrees of principal forgiveness. We're going to see greater degrees of the ability to reach those communities. So I'm really looking forward to that. Are we going to solve every problem? Probably not, but we sure as hell are going to try.
Right. Like you said, it takes time. Well, Thank you so much, Commissioner LaTourette, for your time and everyone who's joined. The next session will start now, so please log off from this stage and join us for the keynote address by Colette, Peshawn Battle. Thank you so much again.
Thank you. Be well.